السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. كيف حالكم جميع؟ I hope you're doing well. Toi. Now we'll start to explain how or what do you mean by toi. So was the sign O is opposite over hypotenuse. So sign of the angle, let's say angle A. So sign of the angle is opposite. This is the opposite A, and this the hypotenuse. Of course, guys, we are talking about right triangle. So the side which is opposite the right angle is what we call the hypotenuse. The side which is opposite the angle itself, we call it opposite, and the side which is adjacent to it or beside the angle, we call it adjacent. So B is the adjacent, A is the opposite, and C is the hypotenuse. Now, sine of A, if you want to find sine of A, you divide opposite by hypotenuse. The basic three rules: cosine equals K, C means cosine, A is adjacent, and H hypotenuse. So cosine of the angle, if you want to find the cosine of the angle, you divide adjacent, which is B, by hypotenuse. Now tangent or tan of the angle equals opposite over adjacent. This is the opposite over adjacent. This is the adjacent. Let's take some examples. If the hypotenuse is 5 and the opposite is 4 and the adjacent is 3. So this is the angle A. Sine equal opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite is 4 and hypotenuse is 5. So 4 out of 5. Now, what about the cosine of the angle? Cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Adjacent, which is 3, over hypotenuse, which is 5. Now, tan of the angle A, opposite over adjacent, which is 4 out of 3. Now, from these basic rules, you can find about 9 rules. Now, here in the first one, the sine of A, sine of the angle, equal opposite over hypotenuse. Now, the first idea I would like to discuss with you, if they ask you to find the angle itself, find the measure of the angle A. Now, first step, you need to look. What do you have? You have the hypotenuse and the opposite. In this case, you use the sine. If you have the hypotenuse and adjacent, you use the cosine. If you have the opposite and the adjacent, you use the tan. For example, find the measure of angle A. Now you are given this 4, the opposite, and this 5. Guys, you need to know which sides do you have. Now he wants the angle. If he wants the sine, you only divide 4 over 5. So if you want find the measure of the angle A, in this case you have to look what do you have. I have the opposite and I have the hypotenuse. So I need to use this rule. So if you want to find the angle itself, not the sine, you can use directly shift sign. You use the calculator and you use shift sign. You use shift sign and you put the opposite over hypotenuse. Directly, it will give you the answer, the measure of the angle. So it depends on what sides do you have. If you need to find the measure of angle A, for example, and you are given the opposite and the adjacent, for example, the opposite is 4 and the adjacent is 3. Now, what do I have? I have the opposite and the adjacent, and I need to find the measure of the angle. So which rule or which law relates the opposite and the adjacent? It's the tan. So I want the angle itself, measure of the angle itself. So on one step, no need to find the tan of the angle, then you find the angle, but directly in one step, because the tan is relates the opposite and the adjacent, I write directly on the calculator, shift tan, then I put the opposite, which is 4, over the adjacent, which is 3, then I directly find the answer. This video is very important for the students in grade 7 and grade 8. Now, let me discuss the missing sides. The missing sides. You first of all, you need to know what is the missing side. It is opposite or hypotenuse or adjacent. To be able, and you need to know what are the given sides. What are the given sides? By this way, you will be able to find the missing side using these 3 rules. But sometimes you don't need to use the rules or these 3 rules directly. You will use the rules which derived from these rules. Here, the first rule, you use sine equal opposite over hypotenuse. So if you memorize these only 3 rules. Now, for example, I will give you this 5 and this 3. And I want, for example, now here, I'm sorry, I will give you this 5 and this here, this 5 and this x. So what side do I have? Hypotenuse. Which side I need to find? Adjacent. And you know that this angle, for example, is 30. You will be given this angle. Now I ask myself, which side I have? Hypotenuse. Which side I need to find? It is what? Adjacent. Now, which rule relates the hypotenuse with the adjacent? It is the cosine. But I don't want to find the cosine because I have the angle. I need to find this side, which is what? The adjacent. From this rule, I can find a way, or I can derive another rule how to find the adjacent. Adjacent equals hypotenuse multiply the cosine. Hypotenuse multiply the cosine of the angle. I multiply them only. So x is the adjacent. So I want to find the adjacent equals hypotenuse, which is 5, multiply cosine 30 or whatever the angle is. Then directly you will find the answer. So we should not depend only on the rules, on the these 3 rules, and we need to find the we derive the other rules. It depends which side you have and which side you need to have, and you depend which rule to use. If you want to find the numerator here, in all the cases, you multiply these 2 sides. If you want to find the hypotenuse, which is the denominator, for example, you need to divide the opposite by the sine. So if you need to find the opposite First of all, if you want to ask to find the sine, you divide opposite by hypotenuse. But if you want to find the opposite, you multiply the sine by the hypotenuse. If you need to find the hypotenuse, you need to divide the opposite by the sine. So let me write the derived rules from these rules. Here, from the first rule, I can write that if you want to find the opposite, which is the missing side, for example, you multiply hypotenuse by sine of angle A. But if you want to find the hypotenuse and you are given the opposite, you directly divide the opposite, divide the sine of the angle A. Same way here. So you don't need to know only 3 rules, you need to know all the 9 rules. Here, if you want to find the adjacent, you are given the hypotenuse, you need to find the adjacent, you multiply hypotenuse, multiply cosine angle A. But if you want to find hypotenuse and you are given the adjacent, you divide the adjacent by the cosine of A. How comes now? How we have 2 rules for the hypotenuse? Look here, if you need to find the hypotenuse and you have the opposite, and here if you want to find the hypotenuse, you have the adjacent, you divide the adjacent by the cosine, or you divide the opposite by the sine. So you don't need to only know 3 rules, you need to know 9 rules. Now, if you know these 9 rules, here, the last one, if you want to find the opposite and you are not given the hypotenuse, you are given the adjacent. So directly, guys, if you want to find the opposite, so you multiply adjacent times tan, because you are not given the hypotenuse, you are given the adjacent. If you want to find the adjacent, but you are not given the hypotenuse, you divide the opposite, divide by tan of angle A. Now you have the 9 rules. You have to remember all these rules. Now, whatever you are given, you can find it. Here, for example, I will give you this as 4. And you have this angle, for example, is 60. And you need to find this. Find the measure of angle AB, or let's say C. So guys, which side I have? I have the opposite. Which side I need to find? Hypotenuse. So which rule relate the opposite to the hypotenuse is the sine. But which side I need to find? The hypotenuse. So I go directly to this rule. Hypotenuse equals opposite divide sine. Why don't I use this rule, hypotenuse equals adjacent divide cosine? Because I don't have the adjacent, I have the opposite. So here, to find this side, which is the hypotenuse, I divide the opposite by the sine. So I write 4 over sine of 60. You see? So it depends which side you have and which side you need to find to know which rule you need to use. Another example. I will give you this side, which is the adjacent for the angle A, which is, for example, 3. And you need to find this side. This side is X. Now, which side I don't have, or I need to find, is the hypotenuse. Which side I do have? The adjacent. I have the angle, this angle, for example, 45. Now, which rule relates the hypotenuse to the adjacent, it is the cosine. So I'm looking here. So let me go back to the rules that I have here. Now, let me erase this part only. Here, you are given this side or this side. So if you are given this side, which is 3, this is the adjacent, and I want to find this, which is the hypotenuse. So which rule relates the hypotenuse to the adjacent? You are given this angle is 45, for example, 45 degrees. Now, to find this side is the hypotenuse. So which rule relates the hypotenuse to the adjacent? This rule, because the missing side is the hypotenuse, which is adjacent 3 divide cosine of the angle, cosine of the 45. So let me tackle the opposite. If it's the opposite way, if you are the opposite way, for example, you are given this side as 5, and this side is missing side, and this angle is 30 degrees. Now, directly, guys, I identify which side I have. I have the hypotenuse. Which side I need to find? Adjacent. So I need to find, I want to use this rule. Each rule has 3 rules, but which rule exactly I need to use from it? The rule which give you the value of the adjacent. So adjacent equals hypotenuse multiply cosine. That's it. That's very easy, I think, now to find the adjacent, which is, I write directly. I use the calculator. I write adjacent equals hypotenuse multiply cosine. Hypotenuse 5 multiply cosine of 30. Now another example. Another example. Now I will give you this side 4, and this side is missing. So I ask myself, which side I am missing is the adjacent, and this angle is 30 degrees, or whatever the angle, because I use the calculator. Now, this side is the opposite, which is known. This side is missing. So directly, my eyes will go to this, the third rule, which is the tangent or tan. Tan relates the opposite to the adjacent, but I need to find which side. I don't need to find the tan. I have the angle. If they ask me to find the tan, I directly divide the opposite over the adjacent. But I need to find the adjacent. So I'm using this rule. Why I'm using this rule? Because I have the opposite. I don't have the hypotenuse, so I will not use the other rules. I need to find the adjacent, which is the opposite, divide tan of the angle A. So I write directly the opposite, which is 4, over this tan of 30. Why I use the tan? Because I'm dealing with the opposite and adjacent. So first of all, you need to memorize these basic 3 rules. Then from these rules, either you remember them or you can derive them from these basic rules. So I put this so, ka, toi to remember that so, which means sine equals opposite over hypotenuse, and cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse, and tan equal opposite over adjacent. So the most important thing you should know that sine relates opposite and hypotenuse, and cosine relates the adjacent and hypotenuse, and tan relates opposite and adjacent. I hope this video is very helpful for you. If you like the video, don't forget to give me like and share this video to your friends, and don't forget to subscribe my channel. That's it for today. Thank you very much.